So Chelsea's season is over. Is that much of a surprise? At this point, probably not. This is kind of a reaction podcast, video, news show, I guess, a combination of things regarding that Real Madrid game last night that I was at. And I guess it's just an indictment of how bad things have been this season that it felt some relief that, well, it wasn't a complete embarrassment and we weren't quite, sort of demolished in the way I think some feared, like myself, before the game. But it was still a defeat. It was still a game where we couldn't finish our chances. And it very much leaves us looking bleakly into the rest of whatever this season now is and then into the summer where we still don't know who the next head coach is going to be. We'll get into that because there have been some stuff regarding that and who could be taking charge. And I think one candidate that I'm very happy is back in the fray. But yeah, I mean, I've got this. I don't know why I brought my flag home. I've got this flag probably to just wipe my tears for the rest of this season. This flag here that they gave everyone. That will probably get thrown away at some point, but I think you need it. I think it could be used for something like that for the rest of this season because it's been so miserable. Listen, I think that tactically, I think Frank Lampard came out of last night looking a lot better than he did against Brighton. I think for about 50 to 60 minutes, I think Chelsea did a lot of good things in the game, and I think from a coaching point of view, I don't know what else he could have done based on the chances we did create, based on creating a setup that would allow us to be proactive, try and create opportunities, try and get back in the game and threaten Real Madrid, whilst also not leaving the door open that the game is basically finished within the first half. And I think from a coaching point of view, I think he did the best he could. And to be fair, I think my reaction, I think a lot of people's reaction was one of kind of shock and depression at that starting lineup, which looked so negative. And, but it is kind of a reflection of Chelsea's lack of end product and lack of quality in certain players that when he made more attacking subs, and I know people will say game state and all of that stuff in terms of by the time he made the attacking subs, Real Madrid were already 1-0 up and the game was effectively over. But we looked better and we looked more cohesive as a team when we had less kind of natural attacking players on the pitch. That says something, doesn't it? And I think it just reflects, how bad any sort of cohesion, any sort of connectivity between attacking players, the output from those attacking players have been this season. Please do like and share if you're watching this on YouTube. Please do give a rate and review on the podcast feed. It really does help out. Thank you for those who do listen and support the podcast. We'll try and make this interesting for the rest of the season. I think the big thing will be who comes in as the head coach, and also kind of doing content around what I would do with the Chelsea squad, and kind of if I was a head coach, if I was in Todd Boehly, if I was in Paul Winstanley, Lawrence Stewart, Christopher Vival kind of territory of looking at who I'd keep, who I'd let go. I'm definitely going to do some content around that now that we effectively know the season is over. So I was, I guess, happy to see N'Golo Kante start, happy to see Thiago Silva back in the team. There's still some things about the team that, frustrated me. No Edouard Mendy back in the starting 11. But again, I'm sort of looking around the team and going, when you haven't got Benoit Badiashile in the Champions League squad, that in itself is a limitation. Who else are you going to play up front other than Kai Havertz, unless you're playing Raheem Sterling there, with no Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, with no David Datro Fofana, with Amanda Broya being injured for the season? We always knew that was going to be a crutch that you were going to find in the Champions League. So again, and to be fair to the players, I think especially in the first half, I think the atmosphere was good. I think the players leaned on that. There were some big opportunities. N'Golo Kante, who I thought overall looked excellent once again, kind of doing the classic Kante of doing the job of several players. And just, I just pray and hope that if he signs that new contract, we can get one decent season of fitness left of him, because he elevates the team to another level. Chelsea look like a different team. They look like a team that can play with more energy, more speed. Everything's not perfect, of course, but I think that Kante just, elevates things to a level that we just haven't seen for the majority of the season. But again, that fitness question is going to be in itself a big one for Kante. I felt that the back three of Silva, Chalobah, and Fofana dealt with an attack of Benzema and particularly Vinicius Junior really well. I thought Reece James, he came sort of sort of inwards and underlapped at times to kind of add another midfield presence. And I felt that the team dealt with that well. I mean, you've got to understand when you come up against Real Madrid with the quality of player they have, you were going to concede opportunities at some point in the game. And Vinicius Junior had one in the first half that he probably should have done better with. But to be honest, I felt we dealt well with that. And I felt that the midfield was able to progress the ball up. I thought Conor Gallagher, again, probably an unfamiliar position, did as well as he could. And I actually felt that Marco Correa in the first half, he should have probably scored that chance right at the end. But, I thought he did some good work down the right as well. Again, we are talking about scraps here. We are talking about still lacking that end product. We are talking about, a team without, say, Ben Chilwell, which, if Chilwell's in that position, I think he's more likely to score that chance that Marco Correa has. But again, I think that based on what was expected, I felt that the team, put up a good fight in what has been a really, really chaotic period. So it was that. And then listen, the first goal that comes after the hour mark, it's, you can talk about Cucurella, his positioning to leave Trevor Chalobah and leave that space for Rodrigo, where Chalobah has to commit himself, doesn't win the foul, or doesn't take him out, doesn't win the ball. And it eventually, gets back and round across the box it goes to Vinicius, then comes back for basically a tap in for Rodrigo. And it was just classic, Chelsea not taking their chances. Real Madrid do take their chances, and it just shows the difference in quality. Again, game state, kind of the natural flow of things. Real Madrid, as the game went on, if the game was still 0-0, we're going to get chances on the break with their speed and the way the game was going to go. Chelsea, it's a cup game. We had to commit men forward. So I think I can't get too despondent on them having opportunities in that situation, because, they are going to get opportunities. I think the positioning of Cucurella is in question, and a player that, has had such a difficult year at Chelsea and his future being questioned. And then the second goal just really kills it. And it's just a shame that it's another defeat, on a night, rather than Chelsea getting a draw or maybe trying to win on the night. We don't get that. And we move on to the future, really, because that's the end of the season, effectively. I don't want it to be the end of good performances, and that, my fear is, and I think we can expect from certain individuals, there will be a drop in performances again, because it isn't the Champions League. I think there are some players in this group who seem to rise on Champions League nights, like a Kai Havertz, but will go missing for large periods of the season in games that do matter, but, aren't the Champions League. He seems to have this knack of turning up in those games, but few others, and that in itself is a problem. I think the balance of things just means that for me, Kai Havertz, sorry to just pick on individuals here, but it reflects more the problem here, that I don't think that's a positive. I really don't. I think when, in a time when Kai Havertz has been given so much responsibility, I think it is on players like that to burden that responsibility and show more consistency over the course of a season, and not just show up in 2 to 3 games. It's not like the Kante situation, where Kante has already done so much in his career, and because of his fitness issues, you are kind of preparing him for Champions League knockout games throughout the course of a season and hoping he'll be available for those. We're talking about a player Kai Havertz, who's fit majority of the season, plays a lot of games, but only tends to really show convincing performances on really, glamorous nights. And I think there is more to being a brilliant player than just that. I think you've got to do it on a weekly basis. I felt that, again, just more signs that Joao Felix is just a player not worth persisting with from this season. I said it in January. It wasn't a very favourable loan to Chelsea. Again, just such a great example in that second half after he came on of basically Felix as a player. He has a lot of style, he has a lot of flair, he has a lot of trickery that makes the crowd go ooh and ah, but that end product is severely lacking. And, it says a lot why Atletico were prepared to part ways with him on loan in the way they did in January. And, I just look across that team. And to be fair, when I look at the squad currently, I see a core of players that I think can be built round. I really do. I don't think it's as dire as saying, you've got to sell majority of these players. number one, that's unrealistic. But number two, there is quality there. There is a young core of players, particularly a younger core, who you are going to build around, who you have invested in, who you aren't just going to sell instantly. But there are very clear players and individuals who need to be let go. If I'm looking at last night's starting 11, for instance, Kepa Arrizabalaga, it's time for him to go. I'm looking at Mateo Kovacic. I think has been a good servant for Chelsea, but are we really getting anything more of it out of him as a player? For me, no. I still think that end product has been his big problem throughout his Chelsea career, and I think some of his recent performances have been really, really poor. I think there's room to get rid of him and either invest in a new central midfielder, which I would, but then also promote younger ones like an Andre Santos and hopefully give minutes to players who can prove more effective in the long run, which is important for us. And of course, Kai Havertz, I'm not the biggest fan of. And I think that if there is a deal to be done there with a Bayern Munich, I would take it very seriously, to be honest, because again, I think there needs to be a shake-up, and I think there needs to be a massive trimming down of this squad in a massive way, because with no Champions League football, with the likelihood of no European football, you're talking about, at most, a 50-something game season if we go the distance in both domestic cups. And, that's not for granted, as we've seen this season. So for the new coach coming in, they cannot be dealing with a large bloated squad, because it's not going to be realistic. It's going to feasibly make the environment like it has this season cluttered and a mess. It has to be, for me, 25, 26 at maximum. You may have to do a load of loans, but that's the situation Chelsea find themselves in, because there are just too many players in this squad that's been known for many months now, but there have also been too many players who've been able to coast at Chelsea for a number of years and need to be let go. It's a combination of those two factors that means there needs to be a clear out. Also for financial FFP reasons too, that Chelsea do need to sell. But I think there is a common consensus, or at least to me from discussions I've had, it's quite clear what players need to be moved on. And it's quite clear what players you'd build around. And to be honest, most of that is just looking at performances this season have made it abundantly clear which ones you keep and which ones you don't. It's not rocket science. So I want to move on now to, the ownership. I spoke about this in my last podcast with the Brighton game, and obviously the ownership having a lot of egg on their face, and, particularly all the articles I've been seeing in recent days talking about how much of a shambles this season is. There's no one that can argue against that. You look at where Chelsea are in the league, still under 40 points as we get closer to May. It's unlikely we're going to get relegated, but the fact that there's even that conversation is a disaster. Miles from Champions League qualification. Of course, even more far away from a Premier League title race, but then also the fact that we may not even get Europa League or Europa Conference League is just disastrous. And when you combine that with the teams above us, the likes of Brentford, Brighton, Fulham, two of those being in West London, and two of those clubs would have been talked about for relegation, who have outperformed Chelsea this season, that's embarrassing. There's no two ways about it. And that's not even getting into when we look at the internal thing of head coaches being sacked, Graham Potter not working out, Lampard coming in as an interim, the players that have underperformed, the signings that we spent a lot on last summer not working. Just there's no way around it. And I could throw in the context when I go on a show like 90 Minutes and say, listen, there are a lot of factors involved, and also they do have now sporting directors they didn't have last summer, but the dramatic underperformance does not reflect well on the new ownership. They have to take the burden of that. And I keep on saying this on Twitter particularly. I just think they have to do some sort of public interview on official Chelsea channels in the summer. I really do at the end of this season. If Todd Boehly and the new ownership want to be have more communication and don't want to be a Roman Abramovich just in the shadows effectively, they want to be someone who's going to communicate and hear, want fans to hear them. I don't think it reflects well at this current point when I'm seeing him say stuff to Gary Cottrell on Sky Sports. Sky Sports reporter chasing him down when he comes out of a restaurant and he makes a comment, or at a New York business conference. It's good to hear those things, but I think it's important that he does it through official channels. There are going to be some people who are just going to dismiss that as PR, as propaganda. But I do think if they come out and a little bit more transparent, whoever it is, maybe even the sporting directors, because that's a thing in English football we seemingly don't do, where the sporting directors actually communicate with the media on a regular basis and communicate with fans. That's something that is done in European leagues a lot more. So if they want to be a little bit revolutionary and try new things, I think that is a smart way of going about it. I think that's important. But we come back to the decision over who is going to be their head coach next. And as I said on Saturday, and as I have felt for a while now, it's very confusing to know what Chelsea is or what the new ownership wants Chelsea to be because of what's happened this season. And I think with the way Potter went wrong, are they going to sort of either double down on what they felt before, but with a new coach, or are they going to kind of be flippant and get concerned by the backlash that Potter got and go in kind of an old school Chelsea direction where it is just going to be hire and fire? I mean, they've had 3 head coaches in 1 year, so they just think that's the way to go. I still lean that I think there needs to be a more clarified vision, and I think most of that comes from the hierarchy of knowing why you want to coach, what is the style of play, what type of characters are we looking to recruit in the coaching staff, but also the type of players we're looking to recruit that are going to work within our squad, and not just opportunities for superstar flashy players, but ones who are going to work in with and fit in with the culture that we have at this club, whatever that culture is. I mean, for years I could argue we don't really have one, or winning is not our identity. Winning is not. I keep on saying this. It's like when people try and tell me that winning is Chelsea's identity. Well, you know how fragile that is when you don't win. It's a nice slogan. It's a nice catchphrase. But what is it about this Chelsea is identifiable for the long term? Because there are clubs above us with equal or higher, levels of finances who are being smart in the transfer market, who are clarifying those things. And unless you have that at Chelsea, we are going to fall behind no matter how much money we have, because it's quite clear when you spend 600 million and you are under 40 points after 30 plus games of the Premier League season, you have done something horrendously wrong, and just having money isn't quite the answer. There's got to be a lot more to that. And I think that, I've given you my opinions on who I think the head coach should be. I'm very glad that I've seen Matt Law's piece today talking about Luis Enrique, Luis Enrique has obviously done a lot of good things in his career. I think with Luis Enrique, kind of my reservation is the number of years now he's been out of club football. 2017 is a long time ago now. And that was the last year Chelsea won a Premier League title. So that, just to give you context, then Diego Costa was still a Chelsea player. It was a different time. VAR hadn't even been implemented properly yet. It was that far, long ago. And I think that it's not to say that he couldn't inspire something, he couldn't still offer something in his career. He clearly wants to get back into coaching at a club level, and particularly with the Premier League. But I look at this squad, I look at the profile of players we have, or the profile of players that we are investing in, and then I think, who is a good match for that? And I do think that, as I've stated before, I think Mauricio Pochettino ticks a lot of boxes. He's worked in the Premier League before. He's proven at, wherever we say jokingly in a tribal way about Spurs, it is a big club. It's not going from Brighton to Chelsea. That jump is not as significant, no matter what anyone tries to tell you. And I know I'm not supposed to say that, but it's just not. It's not. It's a good kind of, if you want to go to a big club or a club with a large support, of course, doesn't have an amazing history in recent years of winning trophies, but still is around the top 6 financially in the Premier League. Then of course Spurs is that. But it's not just the fact that he's worked at Spurs, he's worked in the Premier League, he overachieved in a sense with the finances he had at that club at the time, and for a decent chunk of time, and got them very close, played some brilliant football with a young, hungry group of players, talented players, and extracted the best from them for a few years. But then also has now gone to PSG, and even if that didn't go well for him, I think it is important, and I've said this before, I think it is kind of a non-negotiable for me with who you're bringing in. You need to bring in someone who has a weight of personality, but also has experienced something at a big club, of what the politics can be, what the expectation level is, what the media scrutiny is going to be. Because at times it did feel like Graham Potter was overwhelmed by that in a variety of ways. At least that was my impression at the end. So to have someone who has worked within that environment now at PSG, but I think mainly what I'm leaning on is what he did with Spurs, which I think was, if you try and take away the very tribal and obviously very real dislike of Spurs. I think he did a very good coaching job there, and I think that the Premier League experience matters. I think his ability to see young players and not always lean on what is experience, and I'm just going to go with experience because they're experienced, and actually think if a player is young enough, I'm going to promote them and they're going to be a key part of my team. When we have an ownership and a strategy, at least based on what I saw in January, of buying players younger, of buying players going into their prime. If that is what we're doing in the transfer market now, then I think you need a coach for the next 2 to 3 years, hopefully longer, maybe less, but you try and find coaches who are going to work within that system. If that is what you're trying to do, if you're trying to buy 25 to 30 players, then sure, a short-term boom and bust coach like a Jose Mourinho or an Antonio Conte makes a lot more sense. I do say that Nagelsmann is my second choice. Again, reading a lot about Nagelsmann over the years, I think his track record is one of steady progress, actually quite quick progress at the clubs he's been working at, particularly with Hoffenheim and RB Leipzig. Of course, I guess you'd say, Bayern are here, Chelsea are bigger than Leipzig and Hoffenheim, but he's now worked at a huge club in Bayern Munich and didn't do a woeful job there. It's not like he completely bombed. He lost them the Bundesliga last season. He won the Bundesliga last season. And given where they are under Thomas Tuchel, I mean, it's not going exactly swimmingly since he's left. So he would kind of be my second choice. And again, maybe as someone who's a little bit more of a confrontational type of character, but maybe as well from a tactical point of view, the thing that would excite me about Julian Nagelsmann is kind of those principles and kind of having that structure which he likes to implement, but also giving his players the freedom to try things. I think that has been something that has been a frustration to me in recent years watching Chelsea under different coaches is, you have the Sarri and Tuchel where at times it felt maybe too sort of calculated and too restricted on players' creativity. And it's so about like fine margins, and I talk about margin for error, which is so thin at times comparatively to someone who maybe could add that flair to some of the attacking players we have and give them that freedom, but also within a structure that can work. I think that was the flaw of Lampard, obviously, is not having that structure, particularly off the ball, that has hurt Chelsea in the past. So again, it's a big decision. The only reason I go for Pochettino over Nagelsmann is we do have Premier League experience with him. And I also think he's a good communicator. I think he is someone that, if it started to go well for him at Chelsea, it will go wrong for him at some point. It could happen in 6 months. It could happen in 12 months. It could happen a little bit later. I think you've just got to accept that. I'm not going to sit here and try and tell you this is the guy for the next 5 years, because that's a nonsense way of approaching things from a Chelsea history point of view. But just in terms of football, right? We know how many variables come into it. I just can only look at what's in front of me at the moment. And that's why I lean on Mauricio Pochettino, because I think he would work well with the young group of players if we properly trim down the squad in an appropriate and ruthless manner this summer. Because I think if you are left with still a bloated squad heading into a season that probably doesn't have European football, there are going to be complications for any head coach dealing with that. And it's about, it's all right, Todd Boehly and Benedict Barley then walking into the changing room at Chelsea and going in and berating players. Stuff like that culturally, I think, is only going to make a key dent on those players if they see action and they see that, they actually will get rid of players. Like, they're not messing around here. I think just words, and then those players see that actually I can just still coast along here for years. That's not going to make a lot of difference. I think that's the problem at Chelsea in a lot of recent years, is players being able to coast for far too long, have nice moments throughout the season, maybe contribute to a trophy, and everyone thinks they're brilliant, but then continue to coast and continue to stay at a mediocre to a right level. The fact that it's been so low this season has made it quite obvious who needs to go, but I think they need to enact that change to really get that sense of authority and also show to those young players who did commit their futures in a long-term way to this club in January that it isn't a complete cluster fruitcake, that they need to do that this summer. Sorry, that was a really long ramble on a podcast, but listen, there is a lot to speak about when we speak about Chelsea, and I didn't just want to make this a Real Madrid review because, I don't have that much to say on the game. I think the game is what the game is. I think that, I think Chelsea did their best, but it's their best on what we have, how bad we are in front of goal, the opposition, the quality of opposition, all of that stuff. I'm not saying that it's the best, and it makes me really happy because it's been it's miserable watching Chelsea at the moment, and I've said that a mind-numbing amount of times. I'm going to go and cry into this flag. You can follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.